Hi, my name's Aileen, and for 7 years, I gave everything to my family's company. Late nights, quiet wins, loyalty that no one ever clapped for. Then, one night at a company gala, my own father handed the promotion meant for me to someone who'd been there 3 months. And they all clapped, for her. They said I wasn't leadership material. But what they didn't know was that I kept receipts. Now I'm back. I'm in charge. And I've got one question for you. What do you do when the people who raised you are the same ones trying to erase you? I walked into the room and realized no one was looking for me. This was the annual gala, the kind with custom lighting, violinists in the corner, and wine glasses that clinked before anyone actually toasted. I'd spent 7 years at this company. 7. You'd think I'd feel like I belonged in the room. But the second I stepped through the double doors of that boutique hotel downtown, I felt like an accidental guest at someone else's party. I scanned the room. Russell, my father, technically also my boss, was already deep in conversation with a group of executives. His laugh rang out, that signature "I'm in control here" cadence. He didn't look my way. I waited a beat, maybe two. Nothing. I wasn't expecting a red carpet, but a nod, a wave, even just a "glad you could make it" would have been something. Instead, I was greeted with silence thick enough to chew through. The receptionist handed me a name tag without looking. No assigned seat. "Sit wherever you're comfortable," she chirped. It felt like code for, "There's no space for you here, but we won't say that out loud." I found a table at the far end of the room. A few seats open, sure, but right next to the hallway leading to the restrooms. The chair was wobbly. The floral centerpiece blocked half my view. And yet, I smiled. Practiced. Familiar. I sat, adjusted my napkin, and folded my hands neatly in my lap, like someone who hadn't just been sent to the corporate equivalent of the kids' table. Across the ballroom, laughter erupted. Jolene, fresh-faced, brand new, 3 months into her role, was gliding through the room in a sequined dress and heels that clicked with confidence. She wasn't just visible. She was celebrated. Everyone wanted a moment with her. Even Russell had found his way over, arm slung around her shoulder, whispering something that made her laugh just a little too loud. I looked down at my plate. Empty. Just like the space my name was supposed to be on the company program, where, apparently, I didn't make the cut. Then came the moment that confirmed it. The lights dimmed slightly, and a soft chime rang through the air, signaling a speech. Russell stood and tapped his glass. The chatter quieted. Everyone turned. "Tonight," he began, "we honor those who've brought fresh energy and vision to this company. People who challenge the way we think, who make us better." I straightened in my seat. My heart picked up. Maybe this was it," he continued. "In just 3 short months, this person has revolutionized our client engagement strategy." My stomach dropped. "And it is my great pleasure," he said, "to recognize Jolene for her outstanding contributions. Please join me in congratulating her." Applause exploded. I stayed seated. My hands didn't move. My champagne stayed untouched. I don't remember much of the clapping, just the sound of my heartbeat in my ears and the warmth that rushed to my face, not out of pride, but humiliation. 3 months. She's been here 3 months. I've cleaned up projects nobody wanted, taken client calls at midnight, stayed until security walked me out. And tonight? Nothing. Not even a mention. My name wasn't in the speech, nor in Russell's eyes when he scanned the room after. And when Jolene got up to speak, graceful, rehearsed, overly sweet, I heard lines I'd written, phrases from a pitch deck I had put together last quarter, now dressed up in someone else's voice. People clapped again. Some stood. I sat still. That morning, I'd been moved to a desk near the supply closet. "Temporary reshuffle," they said, right between the printer and the bathroom. Meanwhile, Jolene now occupied my former office, the one with a window and a chair that didn't squeak. As I sat at that table in the ballroom, the waiter passed me and said, "Ma'am, Catering staff is supposed to enter through the kitchen. I blinked, smiled at him. I'm not staff, I said. He flushed, apologized. But it was too late. That's how invisible I'd become. I wasn't even mistaken for an executive. I was mistaken for someone cleaning up after one. Jolene, meanwhile, took photos with department heads. She flashed the kind of smile you'd find on press releases, the kind that says, I belong, and everyone agrees. I glanced at the little box on the table in front of me, a party favor labeled Rising Leadership, one for every guest. I picked it up, turned it in my hands. Then I stood, walked across the ballroom, and without saying a word, handed it to Jolene. Here, I said, quiet but clear. You'll need this more than I do. Her expression froze, just for a second. Then she smiled again, like nothing had happened. I turned away, not angry, not sad, something else, resolved. I walked back to my seat and sat down, folded my hands again, stared ahead. I wasn't going to cry in this room. I wasn't going to demand anything. I'd done enough of that. They think I'm not watching. They think I won't do anything. Let them believe that. If they can't see me now, I didn't sleep that night. Not out of anger, just stillness. Like I was floating just above myself, watching the past few hours on a loop. The claps, the spotlight, the way no one, not even Russell, looked in my direction unless they needed someone to pass the wine. By the time the sun climbed through the gaps in my bedroom blinds, I'd already dressed, packed my bag, and stepped into the same gray blazer I always wore on Mondays. Not because I liked it, but because it didn't wrinkle no matter how little I cared. I walked into the building just after 8. The elevator dinged once, as it always did, and I stepped in alone. Floor 7, Marketing and Strategy. When the doors opened, I half expected someone, anyone, to acknowledge me. But it was like I didn't exist. No, hey Aileen. No, how was the gala? Not even a nod from Russell, who passed me by in the hallway like I was a ghost holding a coffee. I reached my desk, the one tucked between the printer and the hallway that always smelled like industrial disinfectant. Someone had dropped off a stack of documents. No note, no context, just dumped. From across the open space, I heard Jolene laughing. Her voice carried too loud for this early in the day, full of those fake pauses people insert when they want others to ask, "What's so funny?" And someone did. She said, "Oh, just something about spreadsheets. Not everyone's cut out for them, right?" Chuckles, soft, condescending. I stayed quiet. As I opened my laptop, a notification popped up. Forwarded invite to a leadership sync call. I hadn't been added initially. Jolene had sent it accidentally. The attached deck had my work all over it. Visuals, copy, structure. But in the footer, her initials. I scrolled through it once, then twice. Nowhere did my name appear. I didn't reply. I didn't bring it up. I started backing up files. Quietly. A new folder. Strategy, internal use only. That afternoon, we had a team huddle. The kind where everyone stands in a semicircle, pretending it's spontaneous, even though someone always organizes it. Russell stood off to the side, arms crossed, looking like he was there to bless the discussion, not join it. Dan from sales cracked the first joke. Maybe Aileen can take notes again. She's great with minutes. People laughed. The kind of laugh that's short enough to feel harmless, but long enough to make sure you feel it in your chest. I looked up, smiled. Like it didn't matter. Like I was made of steel, not skin. Jolene tilted her head and added, "Well, we can't all be visionaries, right?" That's when Russell, my own father, let out a small chuckle. The kind you give when you want everyone to know you approve, even if you're pretending not to pick sides. Then he said it. The sentence that stayed with me longer than anything else that day. She's always been reliable, not leadership material, but loyal. Loyal. Like a dog. Like a placeholder. I don't remember what was said next. Just the silence that followed when no one contradicted him. No one said, Actually, she ran point on the largest account last year. No one reminded him that I'd trained half the people in the room. They just stood there. And I stood there. And I felt something shift. Not a snap, not a break, a tilt. Like the floor had leaned, just slightly, and I was the only one who noticed. That night, I didn't cry, didn't scream into a pillow, didn't pour a glass of wine and text someone I'd regret texting. I opened the org chart, cross-referenced every project I'd started and where it had ended up, highlighted every instance Jolene's name appeared after mine vanished. I printed it. One page. Clean. Simple. Then I took out a pen and started circling. It wasn't revenge. It was data. They weren't the only ones who could track things. They weren't the only ones keeping score. Let them laugh. Let them think I'd faded. But I was watching. And this time, I wasn't going to warn them. He said I wasn't leadership material. I guess we'll see what I become when I'm done following. Tuesday came like any other, gray and brisk, the sky sitting low over the city as if pressing everything into silence. I parked in the same corner spot I always had, back of the garage, third row from the stairwell. I liked it there. Quiet. Less chance of forced conversations or bumping into people who'd only remember my name when they needed something formatted. When I stepped into the office, the air felt heavy, thicker than usual. It wasn't just the late winter dryness or the recycled heat humming from the ceiling. It was that feeling, like you're watching someone walk around in your clothes, sitting in your chair, wearing your skin like it's theirs now. Jolene walked out of Russell's office just as I reached my desk. She had my old portfolio tucked under her arm, the one with the tab dividers and handwritten notes I'd color-coded over the years. The interns followed close behind her, smiling, eager. I'd spent months mentoring some of them. I even paid out of pocket for one certification exam. And now? They clapped as she passed like she was some kind of royalty. She paused at the copier, caught my eye, and gave me a half wink. The kind that says, "I know what I took, and I know you won't say anything about it." She wasn't wrong. At least, not yet. An hour later, a client debrief notification popped up in my inbox. Not directed to me, just CC'd, probably by accident. The deck attached came from Jolene's email. I opened it out of habit. The title page had her name, bold font, clean layout, but the format was mine. Every bullet, every graph, every line. There it was, my phrase from Q2 last year. Logistics isn't movement, it's rhythm. I scrolled through. The version number still sat in the footer, V4.3 AW. My initials, my file, her stage. I didn't breathe for a few seconds. I didn't forward it, didn't call anyone. I just saved it, quietly, into my archive folder marked documentation. Then I got up and walked to the break room, made coffee I didn't want, and stared at the window while it brewed. Around 6:15 that evening, after everyone else had clocked out or pretended to be busy until they could, I grabbed my coat and headed to my mother's house for dinner. She'd left a voicemail saying she made spaghetti and wanted to talk, her version of checking in after family events where things felt tense, but no one acknowledged it. Her kitchen smelled like garlic and lemon cleaner. The good kind, fresh, sharp, like someone cared about the surfaces they wiped. I kissed her on the cheek, sat down, and smiled like nothing was out of place. She poured me a glass of water, handed me a napkin, and said, "Jolene stopped by this morning. Dropped off that gift box you forgot at the gala." I said nothing. Took a sip. "She's young," my mom continued, "but she's assertive. I think your father sees some of himself in her." The words hung in the air. I nodded slowly, focused on the steam rising from the plate of spaghetti. Each word felt like a spoonful of dirt being packed over a memory I hadn't agreed to bury. Then she added, "Don't take it personally, honey. Maybe it's time you started thinking about something new. You've been tired." That word, tired. It's what people say when they've stopped believing in you, when they want you to give up so they don't have to keep watching. I helped with dishes after dinner, dried each one carefully, placed it on the rack like it was glass blown. She asked how work was going. I said, busy. She didn't ask for more. I left just after 8:30, drove back in the dark without turning on the radio, and sat in my driveway for a full 5 minutes before getting out of the car. Back inside my apartment, I pulled off my coat, kicked off my shoes, and opened my laptop. I started a folder on my desktop and titled it, Things They'll Wish I Never Documented. I dropped in the presentation deck, then the calendar screenshot of when I originally built it. I added screenshots of my notes, time-stamped emails, even the template I designed years ago that was still being used without credit. This wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. They'd pushed me into a corner, thinking I'd curl up and stay quiet. But corners are funny things. They're the best place to see every angle clearly. It wasn't about taking anything back, not anymore. Let them keep the office, the spotlight, the interns. I'd take the receipts. Just after midnight, I closed my laptop and reached for my phone. My screen lit up with a new notification. An internal newsletter sent to all staff. There she was. Jolene. On stage. Smile wide. Hands mid-air, like she was explaining something profound. And behind her, projected on the wall in full screen, was my deck. My graphics. My wording. My structure. Her name underneath the title. I took a screenshot, saved it under the folder. I didn't feel angry. I felt focused. She took my credit. I'll make sure no one forgets where it came from. The glow of her name under my work stayed with me. I could see it even after I closed the laptop. I brushed my teeth, folded my laundry, stood by the window with a cup of tea, and still, in the back of my eyes, it was there. Jolene, center stage, smiling with her teeth and my ideas. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. It was still dark out, but I didn't turn on the light. I just laid there in bed, awake but not tired, already thinking in steps. Sequences. What I would do, not out of emotion, but precision. There's a difference between reacting and responding. They'd been provoking me long enough. Now I'd respond. At 8:03 a.m., I walked into the office. I greeted no one. No one greeted me. I didn't even pause at my desk. I went straight to the break room, brewed a fresh pot of coffee. Not because I wanted any, but because it gave me something to do while I ran the checklist in my head one more time. Back at my desk, I began clearing out my drawers. Slowly, deliberately. Nothing rushed, nothing dramatic. Just quiet organization, stapler, sticky notes, USB drives, the small cactus I'd kept by the window back when I still had one. Everything went into a plain, reusable grocery bag I'd brought from home. The act took no more than 20 minutes, but I stretched it to 45. Let them walk by. Let them look confused and keep walking. By 7:18 p.m., the building was nearly empty. I slid my badge into the time-off box, not required, but symbolic. Walked to the elevator, took one last glance at the floor I'd spent 7 years contributing to, mostly behind closed doors and under someone else's name. When I got home, I opened my laptop and drafted the email. Short, precise, no frills. Subject line, formal resignation, effective immediately. Attachment, 1 PDF, dated, signed. I typed, after 7 years, I've come to understand how value is measured here. This message is not a goodbye, it's a receipt. It marks the last time I'll allow you to decide my worth. I didn't need to reread it. I hit send. To Russell. CC, the executive board. BCC, myself, because someone needed to keep records around here. I closed the screen, shut the laptop, breathed. Sleep came easier than expected that night. The next morning, I walked into a new building across the river. Evans Supply, smaller, sleeker, and somehow the air felt less filtered, like it hadn't passed through 6 layers of approval first. The lobby had a mural with the words, "Built, not bought." I liked that. The receptionist smiled and handed me a badge with my photo already printed on it. She didn't ask me to wait. She didn't look confused about who I was. She said, Welcome, Aileen. Mr. Lang is expecting you. Matthew Lang, CEO, former COO at Russell's company, before he got pushed out for having too strong of a backbone. I remembered how quiet it had gone around the office after that. Like someone had shut a window you didn't know was open. He met me just past the conference room. Navy blazer, sleeves rolled once, no tie. "So, you're ready now?" he asked. I nodded once. More than ever. He handed me a keycard. It had my full name on it. And underneath, Director of Strategic Implementation. "They trained you well," he said. "The mistake was thinking you'd stay loyal to abuse." We shook hands. His grip was firm, but not performative. Inside the office, he walked me through a stack of current accounts. 2 of them were tied to my old firm. Deep contracts, lots of moving parts. One had entire sections lifted from language I'd drafted years ago. Templates, phraseology, even the structure of their cost model. "Looks familiar, doesn't it?" he said with a smirk, flipping the page. "They're not subtle," I replied. "You don't need revenge, Aileen," he added. "You just need to do your job better than they ever thought possible." I intend to. We spent the rest of the afternoon outlining a rollout strategy for a logistics overhaul. My kind of work. Systems, not politics. The kind of project that required the very skill set I'd been told wasn't leadership material. That same phrase kept bouncing in my mind. Not out of pain anymore, but fuel. By the time I left the office, the sun had already started to dip, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I stood outside the Evans building for a moment, looking at my reflection in the glass doors. It didn't look blurred anymore. For the first time in a long while, I could see myself clearly. And maybe, just maybe, they'd start to see me too. If they thought I was gone quietly, they forgot who taught me how to listen before I moved. I didn't walk into that meeting room hoping to prove anything. I walked in to finish something. The meeting had been scheduled under the guise of a renewal partnership discussion. Evans Supply was now in charge of several key logistics contracts previously owned by my old company. It was protocol to meet. Formality, really. But no one expected I'd be the one sitting on the other side of the table, especially not Russell. The email had been sent to our department, alias at Evans. The procurement coordinator from my old company didn't bother checking who would actually attend. I replied myself. I didn't copy anyone. I didn't explain. I showed up. That Tuesday morning, I arrived 10 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, but because I knew they'd be late, and I wanted to see the room fill in. When Russell entered, he did a double take. Jolene was right behind him, rifling through a printed deck, chewing on her pen like she was still an undergrad. Russell didn't speak, not at first. He sat 3 seats down, clearly waiting for someone else from Evans to join. I placed my folder neatly on the table, pulled out my pen. "Shall we begin?" I asked. Calm. Level. The air shifted. Chairs squeaked. Jolene froze mid-sentence. Her eyes darted between me and the nameplate I'd just set down. Aileen Waters, Director, Strategic Operations, Evans Supply. She blinked, then looked at Russell. He didn't blink at all. He leaned forward, forced a tight-lipped smile. "I wasn't aware you'd be leading this." I returned the same smile. "I didn't think you were aware of a lot of things lately." The woman from legal on their side cleared her throat, trying to bridge the awkward silence. She gestured to the screen at the end of the table. "Let's jump into the Q3 deck?" Jolene plugged in her laptop, opened the file, and the slideshow began. I watched. Quiet. No interruptions. Page 4, there it was. Slide titled, Next Gen Fulfillment Flow. The chart, the format, the language, my structure, down to the background shade I always use to guide reader attention. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Page 5. It got bolder. A bullet point read, Logistics is rhythm, not just movement. They used my line. Again. That same phrase they'd once called a bit too poetic when I'd first pitched it internally. I opened my laptop, calm, deliberate, plugged in the HDMI, The screen switched over instantly. My version appeared. V4.3. Created 6 months prior. Timestamped. Metadata intact. Authored by me. I let it sit there for a moment. No commentary, no gloating. Then I spoke, voice low but unmistakably clear. You may have forgotten where this came from. I didn't. The room froze. Russell shifted in his seat. Jolene tried to smile, but it faltered halfway. Their legal advisor coughed into her fist. We, understood this was provided by your firm's design team? I clicked again. A full audit trail of the file history appeared. Names, edits, time logs. Mine was the only name on the origin file. It wasn't, I said simply. Russell stared. For the first time in years, he didn't have a comeback. He finally leaned back and said, This feels personal, Aileen. I tilted my head. No, Dad. This is business. You taught me to separate the two. I finally listened. You could hear the air leave the room. Behind Jolene, one of their operations managers had started typing rapidly, likely making internal notes. Someone else picked up their water glass but didn't drink. They just needed something to hold. Jolene cleared her throat. We should probably revisit this, internally. I nodded. I'd recommend that. I let the silence stretch, not to be dramatic, but to let it settle in. When I closed the file, I added, as casually as someone ordering lunch, You'll hear from our legal team by end of day. Russell opened his mouth, then closed it. He didn't push. Maybe he finally learned. As I stood to leave, no one stopped me. No one said a word. I walked out the same way I walked in. Head high, bag light. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. And I had more coming. The door shut behind me with a soft click, but the echo followed me down the hallway. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Their silence was enough. Back at my office, I didn't rush. I poured myself a glass of water, stared out the window for a minute, then sat down and opened my inbox. As I expected, the emails had already started arriving. The first came from Russell. Subject line, Can we talk? No greeting, no punctuation, just 6 words in the body. Let's discuss offline when you're free. I didn't respond. The next was from legal. Technically, you own the strategy, the message read. We're confirming chain of authorship. I smiled a little at that. Technically was the word people used when they didn't want to admit they were wrong, but knew they'd have to pay for it anyway. Jolene, of course, hadn't emailed. No apology, no clarification, just silence. The kind that pretends not to hear, hoping you'll let it slide. But I wasn't the sliding type anymore. They thought I'd just caught one file. They didn't know I had archives. 10 minutes later, another email came in. This one from Maura. We'd worked together for years, shared lunch breaks, talked about her divorce, her daughter's asthma, her dreams of moving to Oregon, just to breathe better. But when the room laughed at me, she'd laugh too. That kind of betrayal doesn't scream. It whispers. Still, her name in my inbox gave me pause. Subject, I'm sorry. I opened it. Aileen, I was there when you presented that strategy the first time. I remember the layout, the wording. I remember you asking me to review the final draft. I forwarded it, once, to Jolene. She said she needed a reference for tone. I didn't know she'd use it. I didn't know she'd call it hers. I should have said something. I didn't. I'm sorry. I attached the original file with your comments, just in case you don't have it. You probably do. I don't want to be silent anymore. I'm not brave. But maybe I can be useful now. It wasn't absolution, but it was something. I downloaded the file, opened it. Her version still had my initials in the margin. AW, note this phrasing. I compared it side by side with the deck presented in that meeting. Identical in structure, down to the sequence of color coding I'd invented to help executive teams skim faster. It wasn't inspiration, it was theft. I didn't yell. I didn't forward the email with a smug note. Instead, I created a new message. 2. Board Ethics Committee. Subject. Attribution review, request attachments. 2. No body text, no rant, just receipts. The next day, I received a calendar invite. Internal review, attribution discrepancy. Scheduled for Thursday, 30 minutes, virtual. I logged in early. I wore a navy blouse, tied my hair back, wore minimal makeup, clean lines, straight posture. Russell was already there when I joined. Alone. No Jolene, no legal counsel, just him and a notepad that looked barely used. He gave me a nod that felt more rehearsed than sincere. "I know why we're here," he said. "Good," I replied. He exhaled, adjusted his collar. "This wasn't about your work," he began. "It was about presence. Jolene had presence." I didn't answer, just waited. "She could handle the room. You were good at the build, but she could pitch." I leaned forward slightly, voice even. "And now that the room knows I built it?" He didn't respond. His eyes moved toward the corner of the screen, like something more interesting had popped up behind his camera. "You pushed for her promotion," I continued. "You knew she used my work. You signed off on it anyway." He rubbed his forehead. "People like clarity, clean energy." Jolene smiled. I blinked once. "And I had proof. And now, you have neither." The call ended 15 minutes later. No apology, no resolution. Just an email from HR later that afternoon confirming that a third-party review would determine next steps. At 5:30, I stood to leave. As I gathered my things, I saw a new message slide into my inbox. Internal chatter from someone in their finance team accidentally copied to me. The line read, "Frankly, I don't know how we missed what she was doing. Or how we missed her." I didn't respond. But as I walked out of the building, I felt something shift. Not in them, in me. I no longer needed them to see me. They noticed now. But I was done waiting to be seen. The next morning, I didn't set an alarm. I didn't have to. Something in my body was already attuned to the tension in the air. You know it when it's coming, like the drop in temperature before a storm. You don't see the lightning yet, but you feel it in your bones. By 9 a.m., I was already halfway through my second cup of coffee when Carolyn from Evans pinged me on internal chat. "See, you have to see this." A second later, a file popped up, audio from a product demo Jolene had led the afternoon before. She stumbled over the opening, misread half the client's specs, mistook East Coast delivery lanes for West Coast ones, paused, scrambled, and then redirected with a vague, "Let me check with the ops team and circle back." I didn't say anything, but Carolyn did. "See, she doesn't even understand the platform. How is she leading supply chain?" Another voice chimed in during the recording. "Because Russell said so." I clicked pause, closed the file. It wasn't surprising. I'd known for a long time that Jolene could mimic charisma, rehearse lines, but actual problem-solving, crisis handling, logistics under pressure, that was never her arena. By Thursday, it wasn't just us noticing. The first client email came through before lunch. "We'd like to transition contract oversight back to Aileen Waters' team. Current oversight is insufficient." By Friday, 3 more had followed. One noted that project momentum has slowed. Another used the phrase competency concerns. But the one that stuck with me simply said, "Your silence built more trust than her weekly briefings." I let those words sit. I didn't gloat. I didn't forward them to anyone. Just saved them, added them to my folder marked Fallout. It was getting heavy. That same day, around 3:30 p.m., Russell called an emergency board session at his firm. We got wind of it through Evans's sales team, who'd been copied on a revised pricing proposal Jolene tried to push out that same morning, without approval and with errors that would have cost the company 6 figures. The board meeting was closed door, but someone in their IT ops, someone who'd quietly sent me anonymized notes before, sent me a ping. Just one line. "He's scrambling." The transcript came later. Russell had opened with what he called market volatility. Said it was temporary turbulence, nothing serious. Claimed the company was still strongly aligned long-term. But the board didn't nod. They didn't jump to his defense. Too quiet, too long. At one point, someone said, "What exactly is Jolene's role in this downturn?" Another added, "Did we ever independently verify her strategy before signing off?" And then, someone asked, "Has Aileen been approached about returning?" The meeting ended without a conclusion, but it left a mark. That night, I went home, made soup, and didn't open my laptop. I didn't need to check my inbox to know more messages were waiting. The ball was rolling. I could feel it. The next morning was the quarterly Q&A session with clients, the one where Jolene was supposed to present a new supply chain model. She went live at 10 a.m. I didn't plan on watching it, but someone from legal sent me a link and said, "Might be worth a glance." So I clicked. Jolene opened strong, smiling like she had everything under control. But 5 minutes in, a client asked about a distribution delay affecting the Northeast region. She guessed, gave a date that was already contradicted by tracking data visible on screen. The COO leaned in, politely cut her off. Another client pressed again. Her voice wavered. She paused, looked down, then blurted, I'm not sure. I'll check with Aileen." The room froze. The live stream chat exploded in awkward emojis and silent dots. Russell, seated behind her, clenched his jaw so tight his molars probably chipped. I closed the browser. That was enough. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Evan's legal counsel. One line, "They're asking for you, all of them." I stared at the message for a long moment. Not surprised, not even smug. Just calm. The house they built without me was cracking. And this time, no one was going to patch it for them. They finally wanted me back. But I had one condition left. The following Monday morning, I stood at the edge of the same boardroom I used to be ignored in. Only this time, the seat waiting for me was at the head of the table. The marble conference table gleamed under recessed lights. The chairs looked newer. The coffee smelled stronger. But the people? The people were still the same, at least on the surface. Except now, they were quiet. Alert. Watching me. Evans had finalized the acquisition over the weekend. A clean majority. The company I once bled for was now partially under our umbrella. And me, I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for order. I didn't bring fanfare, no speeches, no warnings. Russell was already seated. He didn't stand when I walked in. Jolene sat beside him, flipping through a printed report with the same shallow confidence she'd always carried. One of the assistants offered me coffee. I declined. A member of the transitional oversight team handed me the updated leadership packet, signed, sealed. My vote, they said, was the deciding one. I opened a small folder I'd brought, not the glossy kind, just paper and facts. "I've reviewed the performance logs," I began. My voice was even, not loud. "I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here to finalize transitions that should have happened months ago." I read the names clearly, without hesitation. One who duplicated work they didn't author. One who contributed to workplace manipulation. One who actively dismissed team transparency. Next to each name, one word. Terminated. No fanfare. No raised voices. Just silence. Just heads that slowly began to nod. Not in agreement, but in recognition. Everyone in the room knew what I was doing wasn't personal. It was overdue. Jolene went pale. She didn't speak. She didn't even blink. Then Russell stood. "You've made your point," he said, jaw tight. "But this isn't necessary. You're proving something no one asked you to prove." I looked up at him. Calm. "No. You proved something years ago, that power belongs to whoever's loudest. I've simply corrected that." He tried again. "Aileen, don't do this. We're family." That word, family. He wielded it like a shield when it was convenient, like a weapon when it wasn't. "You taught me to separate family from business," I said, meeting his eyes. "I finally learned." I reached into my bag and handed him an envelope. His name was typed on the front. He didn't open it. Not in front of everyone, but he knew. "I'm not stepping down," he said flatly. I didn't flinch. "You already did. You just didn't write it down yet." One of the board members cleared his throat. Another looked away. Russell turned toward Jolene as if expecting support, but she kept her eyes on the table, hands folded tightly. No one came to his defense. The seat he'd built an empire from, the one he once said I wasn't ready to fill, was now empty, and no one tried to stop me from sitting in it. The meeting ended 35 minutes later. Quiet. Clean. As the last person exited the room, I stayed behind, collected my folder, closed the leather-bound binder that held years of silence, now finally heard. Then I stood, looked at the empty chair at the end of the table one more time. "This isn't revenge," I said to no one in particular. "This is restoration." I stepped out into the hallway. The air felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was no longer the one being dismissed. I wasn't the one waiting. I'd shown up for myself. Not because I wanted an apology. I just needed space. Space to finally become who I was always meant to be. The hallway outside the boardroom had gone quiet. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, my heels clicking against the polished tile with the kind of calm only earned when there's nothing left to prove. I wasn't headed to a new role, or a title, or a victory speech. I was just going home. But healing, real healing, doesn't follow schedules or meetings. It creeps in quietly, often in places you never expected it. 2 weeks later, I got an email from a name I didn't recognize right away. The subject line read, "Found something from the gala, thought you might want it." It was from the event photographer. Curious, I clicked. It was the group photo, the one taken the night Jolene was promoted. I hadn't asked for it, hadn't thought about it since. As the image loaded, my eyes scanned familiar faces. Russell, Jolene, department heads, even the intern who once cried in my office after her first failed pitch. But my seat, the one at the edge of the long table, was empty, cropped out. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, not moving. Then I downloaded the image and saved it in a folder labeled, "Proof I Never Needed Them There." I didn't cry. Not because I didn't feel something, but because I had finally learned to let things pass through me without staying lodged in my chest. That same week, I led a quarterly rollout review at Evans. No streamers, no cake, just updated spreadsheets, revised projections, and a plan that kept us lean and prepared. When I finished, the team clapped once. Not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. It was enough. Matthew stopped by my office that Thursday afternoon. He leaned on the doorframe with his usual easy posture and said, "So, was it worth it?" I looked up from my screen. Thought for a moment. "Yes," I said, but not because they were wrong, because I stopped needing them to be right. He nodded. "That's the best kind of peace." He didn't linger, just offered a soft smile and walked off to whatever executive meeting had his name on it. Later that night, I sat on my balcony with a blanket across my legs, sipping tea. The lights of the city blinked back at me, steady and unimpressed. I liked that about this place, how it didn't care about titles or grudges. It just kept moving. There was a time I would have felt unmoored without someone else's approval. I used to need a nameplate, a handshake, a banner with my name on it to feel like I mattered. Now I had my own kind of evidence. Emails, presentations, deals signed with my initials on the dotted line, and a piece that didn't demand attention. Still, sometimes my mind drifts. I wonder, what if I'd stayed? What if I kept quiet, kept nodding, kept pretending like invisibility was noble? But every time that thought visits, I remind myself of something I learned too late. You can't rebuild yourself in the place that taught you to shrink. You can forgive from a distance. You can heal from absence. But you cannot grow while waiting for someone else to admit they were wrong. The photo from the gala? I printed it. Not to keep, to study, to remember what it felt like to disappear while sitting in plain sight. Because healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering, and choosing to live anyway. I stepped out of the Evans building that Friday under a soft layer of snow. The sky was pale, stretched thin, the way winter evenings are when everything feels quieter than it should. I zipped up my coat, pulled on my gloves, and stood there for just a moment. No applause, no welcome home, no one cheering, but I smiled. To myself. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. Some victories don't come with a parade, just peace, and that's enough.